Hello, my name is Dr. Craig Broder. I'm founder and CEO of Exercising Nutritionally. We're a medical research company just outside of Chicago, Illinois. The information I'm about to present to you was collected on relaxed far infrared saunas in the early part of 2022 for our proof of concept trials. A proof of concept trial is a series of projects in which you collect data as if you're doing a standard research project that's been approved by an institutional review board, and you have X number of subjects, and you have a specific concept that you are trying to an hypothesis prove. In a proof of concept trial, we're trying to determine what the best direction of a research project is. And so in the current study, we took somebody who was acclimatized to far infrared, and we put them through a series of pilot data collection days to gain information to help us develop an actual formal research study using far infrared technology. So, Exercising Nutritionally is a company that I started after teaching in medical school and university life for about 35 years, and it's actually my retirement gig. We are a research and education company. We help promote healthy living and aging. Our research programs are about developing projects that are evidence-based. We focus on wellness, enhanced human performance. The research projects on the role of nutrition and physical activity play in helping prevent lifestyle-related diseases, and we often study within those projects molecular, biochemical, and physical aspects of the study. Populations can vary from children to senior populations, and we help new startup companies if they have an idea that they would like to have preventive health applications that could lead to an FDA application claim, such as can a beet nitrate supplementation improve blood pressure, would be one example of things that have been studied in the past. And we partner with all the several clinical universities and have students do their internships, their theses, and other research projects through our company. Some of the companies we work with are well known, like Garmin Corporation, Red Bull. We worked with the Chicago Bulls several years ago to develop 21 fitness centers for a federal education grant and nutrition programs for underserved students in the Chicago area. Work with the American Diabetes Association and a variety of other companies. So let's get started. And the very first thing we do is we have three phases altogether, and this is what phase one looks like. Our first goal was to look at how muscle oxygen saturation changes when you're in a far infrared sauna. And this was actually an idea that came out of relaxed saunas. They asked us to start to look at this, and we were happy to do that for them. So we use something called the Moxie monitor. It's a it's a near infrared. It has a laser in it, and it sends a little light beam into your muscle. And when that light beam bounces back, we can determine how much of your red blood cells have oxygen in it and how much of your red blood cells are void of oxygen. So we did three initial just treatment measurements. One was sitting in the chamber but not turning on the unit. The second one was to put the unit of far infrared treatment set at level 1 and then set at level 2. You will see in this graph of the results plotted on the y-axis is the percent saturation, and this is over time. And you will see that when you are just sitting in the chamber, there is a slight increase of about 10% of oxygen saturation because it's slightly warmer, the chamber's closed, muscles are starting to get a little bit more blood flow to keep a person cool. Once we turned on the sauna at the first level, you will see that it dramatically went up within a few measurements and got up to about 78%. you'll see that when we turned on the second sensor, so that it was at the highest level, it went up a little bit, but it didn't go up as much as you might expect. Now, maybe if we went longer, it would go up, but what you saw was that it's very similar response. So this suggests that if you were even on the low setting and that you go long enough, you might be able to get a similar response with a lower heat setting, far infrared setting. And this is very good at the start of getting used to using far infrared treatments. It may also be good for people that have a more difficult time tolerating the change in temperature. That would be people that might need to lose a little weight, people that have a little bit in heat intolerance for whatever reason. And so this tends to lean to the fact that you might be able to get a similar benefit and just have to change the time versus the intensity. The second part of what we were about to do it was a little bit more in detail. It also included an exercise session. And so what we did was, one, we placed sensors on different parts of the body. In the first one, we only put it on one particular body. We put the sensors on the legs, which is very typical for some of the things that we look at. And so now we put it on the calf, the quads, the chest, and the back. And we did a 15-minute infrared, the highest setting, just prior to exercise. And we wanted to see if this would help with anything related to warm up, kind of like a warm up without actually warming up. Cycling was a steady state tempo ride. And then immediately post cycling, we had a far infrared treatment for 20 minutes. And then after that, we had a person lie down at supine rest with a light blanket after getting out of the chamber, and we measured them for another 30 minutes. This graph here on the right shows what we saw, and you can see for pre-exercise cycling and post-cycling that the chest had the greatest oxygen saturation, and you will see that if you look at the numbers here, this is the mean of saturation. So prior to exercise, the muscles were saturated 47%. During exercise, saturation went down because oxygen was being utilized. Okay, and that went down to 36%. Then it went back to 49% total post. And very interestingly, in the 30 minutes after the treatments were done lying down, oxygen saturation dramatically increased to 65%. So the data shows that there's slightly different responses, but the benefit of far infrared as far as oxygenating your body, helping clear out lactate post-exercise, and a possibility of increasing blood flow because you can't increase oxygen saturation without increasing blood flow to a given area, was maintained for another 30 minutes. So in the next phase 3, we did a much more comprehensive evaluation, and we covered a whole variety of things. And so this is some of the things that we measured. This is the person here. You see the person in the sauna hooked up to what's known as a metabolic mask. They also had a series, and so we could measure actually with them the resting metabolic rate. We had the Moxy sensors on again, but we also had an EKG system on so that we could directly measure beat by beat cardiac output, stroke volume, and heart rate. We had a very, very fancy blood pressure system that allowed us to measure systemic vascular resistance and changes in blood pressure in real time. The protocol looks something like this, where we had an instrument set up. For 10 minutes, the person rested inside the sauna, but we didn't turn it on. And then we took a group of baseline measurements of all those variables that we were looking at, 0 to 5 minutes. And Then we took another set of baseline measurements at 10 minutes. And then we did heat level 1 for at the 15-minute mark, and the 25-minute mark increased the heat again. And then the person sat in the sauna for approximately 40, at the 45-minute mark, we made a thing, and 55-minute mark. So about 15 minutes in the sauna. So let's look at some of the data. We were collecting data on a continuous basis, so we were actually able to do some statistics on the data. And this first graph is showing you the oxygen, how the oxygen uptake, the more oxygen uptake a person has, the more calories that they burn. And so on the y-axis, you see the calories per minute, and you see the 4 measurements periods: baseline, heat level 1, heat level 2, and recovery. And you will see between baseline and heat level 2, there was a significant increase in oxygen uptake. You will also see that between baseline and after that, while the values were higher, they were not statistically higher. But this tends to show, you have to keep in mind this is technically one subject, but we're analyzing multiple measurements as if we had different subjects. And so it shows that there is a slight tendency to increase uh, energy expenditure during the treatment periods that we were measuring. If we look at the skeletal muscle, this is very distinct. It's very similar to what we saw. So compared to baseline, there was a distinct increase in oxygen saturation at the muscle level, both for heat 1 and heat level 2. And you will also see that heat level 1 to post-recovery was significantly higher. So you do the far infrared, the muscles get oxygenated, the muscle's metabolic rate goes up slightly, and those are all positive things that would have benefit in the long run. Cardiac output, which is how much blood is being pumped every minute in liters. There were no statistical differences. However, you can see that baseline and heat were all around, I'll say, just a little under 5 liters, but in heat level 2 and post, cardiac output was up. So there was a greater metabolic demand. That's what we saw with the oxygen uptake. And you would expect a greater cardiac output, and we saw that. Now, although it was not statistical, it's, again, you need to understand that this is partly because we don't have a lot of data to analyze. When we look at systemic vascular resistance, by the time we got to heat level 2 and recovery period, systemic vascular resistance went down. That would suggest that if we measured blood pressure, which we did, we would expect that blood pressure would also go down to some degree. So let's see what we saw. And you will see that from the period of baseline to recovery, blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, SBP, went down about 5.6%. Diastolic blood pressure went down about 4.1%. ASB stands for aortic systolic blood pressure and aortic diastolic blood pressure. And our sophisticated blood pressure system, it's a pulse wave system, allowed us to see that the amount of pressure just in the aorta as the blood comes out the heart was also reduced. That's a very big benefit from a heart function perspective, because the more pressure the heart sees coming out, the more adaptation it might have to make that could lead to, over long periods of time, changes in the heart that are not optimum for an individual. It's actually a sign of aging. As people age, their aorta gets a little bit more, gets a little stiffer, and their heart has to chronically adapt to pushing harder to get the blood out, like a weightlifter would have to push harder to lift a heavier weight. So let's look at what the results actually showed. And in summary, and we saw that whole body muscle oxygenation and kcal's expended per minute increased from about 8.1% to 20% from baseline. We saw that cardiac output increased about 10%, systemic vascular resistance went down about 14%, and you would expect heart rate to go up as you are in a more stressful environment compared to baseline. It combined, these results show that far infrared had some measurable positive effects on both cardiovascular function, and metabolic thermogenic responses, which led to an enhanced body oxygenation, regional blood flow to allow whole body thermoregulation and cooling. We didn't present this in the graphs, but we saw similar responses in respiratory values. Ventilation went up 20%, tidal volume went up almost 30%, and they had a lower respiratory frequency. What's really interesting about that data is the greater the tidal volume and the lower the respiratory frequency, the deeper the air gets in the lung and the easier it is for that air to transfer oxygen to the blood that passes through this. And so for some reason during this particular trial, and it would need to be verified, but the oxygen exchange in the lung had a more efficient breathing pattern, and it looked more similar to what you might see in a meditative type state, but it was a very positive response. We would have to replicate this where somebody spent the exact same amount of time in the chamber, but not having the far infrared turned on to see if just the relaxation of sitting in the chamber had a benefit. So it appears that far infrared in these three little pilot proof of concept projects had positive effects on muscle oxygenation, energy expenditure, cardiac output, and they even lowered acutely both peripheral and aortic blood pressure by reducing the body's systemic vascular resistance as the blood vessels vasodilated so that a person could stay cool in the chamber. Future investigations should verify these results. 10, 20 subjects, we would have to do a power analysis to actually get the exact number. But the results you're seeing here are very similar to light to moderate exercise. And we would need to test protocols that lasted a little longer. Post-recovery would be 60 to 90 minutes to get a better look at thermogenic effect. But the goal would be future studies to look at how does a light walking or moderately light walking fast exercise for 30 to 60 minutes compared to the 30 to 60 minute bout of far infrared treatment at either a low setting or the higher setting. How do they compare? And with that, the presentation comes to close. If you would like to reach us and have further questions, our website is www.enllc.us. Thank you.